The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the concrete training facility, casting harsh shadows across the mats that had seen countless battles, defeats, and victories. Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez adjusted her gloves one final time, her dark eyes scanning the room filled with seasoned military personnel. At 24, she was younger than most, smaller than all, and, according to the whispers that followed her everywhere, completely out of her league. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya had earned her way into this elite military training program through sheer determination and an unblemished service record. But standing in that room, surrounded by men who towered over her 5'4" frame, she felt the familiar weight of skeptical stares. She'd grown accustomed to being underestimated. It had become her secret weapon over the years. Let them think she was weak. Let them assume she didn't belong. Maya Rodriguez had learned long ago that the element of surprise was worth more than size or reputation. The training facility at Fort Braxton was legendary among military circles. Only the most elite soldiers were selected for the Advanced Combat Training Program, a grueling 6-month course designed to push the human body and mind beyond conventional limits. Maya had been one of only 3 women selected out of 200 applicants. The other 2 had already washed out within the first month, unable to withstand the psychological pressure and physical demands that came not just from the instructors, but from their fellow trainees who seemed determined to prove that women had no place in their sacred brotherhood. Sergeant First Class Derek "Tank" Morrison stood at the opposite end of the training mat, his massive 6'3" frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the space around him. At 38, Tank was a veteran of 3 deployments, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness in both combat and training was whispered about in mess halls across multiple bases. His arms, covered with tattoos that told stories of battles fought and brothers lost, flexed as he rolled his shoulders in preparation. Tank had volunteered to be Maya's sparring partner today, a fact that had drawn a crowd of onlookers who sensed blood in the water. "You sure you want to do this, Rodriguez?" Tank's voice carried across the mat, dripping with condescension that made Maya's jaw tighten. "I'd hate to send you to the medic on your first week. Maybe you'd be more comfortable with some push-ups in the corner while the real soldiers train." The laughter that rippled through the watching crowd felt like acid on Maya's skin. She'd heard variations of this taunt her entire military career, from basic training through her deployment in Afghanistan, where she had proven herself time and time again only to return stateside and face the same doubts, the same challenges to her right to wear the uniform. Captain James Mitchell, their instructor, watched the exchange with calculated interest. He was a fair man, but Maya knew he was also evaluating her response. Would she crack under pressure? Would she back down? Would she prove that the doubters were right, that women simply couldn't handle the psychological warfare that was as much a part of military life as physical combat? Maya stepped onto the mat, her boots silent against the rubberized surface. She'd learned to move quietly during her childhood in East Los Angeles, where survival often depended on being invisible, on avoiding the wrong attention at the wrong time. Those skills had translated surprisingly well to military life, where observation and patience were often more valuable than brute force. "I'm exactly where I need to be, Sergeant Morrison," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. She began her pre-combat routine, a series of movements that helped center her mind and prepare her body. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like simple stretching, but Maya was activating muscle memory built through years of martial arts training that had begun long before she ever thought about joining the military. Tank smirked, misinterpreting her calm preparation for nervousness. "Tell you what, little girl, I'll go easy on you. Wouldn't want to hurt our diversity hire on the first day." The words hit Maya like a physical blow, not because they wounded her pride, but because they revealed the depth of Tank's contempt. Diversity hire, the phrase that followed every successful woman and person of color in the military, the implication that merit had nothing to do with their presence, that they were token appointments designed to make the institution look progressive, rather than soldiers who had earned their place through skill and sacrifice. Maya's breathing remained steady, but something cold and focused settled in her chest. She thought about her father, a Marine who died in Iraq when she was 12, never knowing that her daughter would follow in his footsteps. She thought about every drill instructor who had tried to break her, every fellow soldier who had questioned her right to stand beside them, every moment when she had to prove herself not just once, but over and over again. The crowd around the mat had grown larger, word spreading through the facility that Tank Morrison was about to put the new female recruit in her place. She could see the anticipation in their faces, the expectation that this would be quick and decisive. They wanted a show, and Tank was more than happy to provide one.
Captain Mitchell stepped forward, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the growing crowd. "This is a training exercise, not a spectacle. Both of you remember that." His eyes lingered on Tank for a moment longer, a silent warning that the veteran chose to ignore. Maya began her final preparations, checking her stance and centering her weight. She had trained in multiple martial arts disciplines, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga, and boxing, but her foundation was in traditional karate, which her father had insisted she learn before his deployment. "Discipline before strength, Mija," he had told her during their last conversation. "The strongest fighter isn't always the biggest one." Tank, meanwhile, was playing to his audience, flexing and shadowboxing, making comments loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hope you've got good insurance, Rodriguez. This is going to hurt." His confidence was built on a foundation of legitimate skill. Tank Morrison hadn't earned his reputation through intimidation alone. He was a formidable fighter, experienced in military combat training and street fighting that had started long before his enlistment. What Tank didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Maya Rodriguez had been fighting her entire life. Not just the obvious battles, the poverty of her childhood, the loss of her father, the struggle to prove herself worthy of the uniform he had died wearing, but literal fights. Her neighborhood in East LA hadn't been kind to a young Latina girl, and her mother's work schedule meant Maya was often on her own, learning to defend herself or become a victim. She had found her way to Master Chen's dojo at 14, paying for lessons by cleaning the floors and helping with children's classes. Master Chen was a former Marine himself, a Vietnam veteran who recognized something in the angry, grieving teenager that reminded him of his own youth. Under his guidance, Maya had transformed her anger into precision, her pain into power. "Fighters ready?" Captain Mitchell asked, positioning himself to referee the match. Maya nodded, settling into her fighting stance. Her feet were positioned shoulder-width apart, her center of gravity low, her hands up but relaxed. She looked smaller than ever next to Tank's imposing frame, but there was something in her posture that suggested coiled potential, like a spring compressed and waiting for release. Tank's stance was more aggressive, designed for quick, devastating attacks. He was used to overwhelming opponents with size and strength, ending fights before they could truly begin. His reach advantage was significant, nearly 8 inches, and he planned to use it to keep Maya at a distance while landing punishing blows. "Begin." Tank moved first, exactly as Maya had expected. He came forward with a straight right hand, a predictable attack that showcased his overconfidence. Maya slipped the punch easily, her head movement minimal, but effective. The crowd murmured at her defensive skill, surprised by the fluidity of her evasion. "Lucky dodge," Tank grunted, immediately following up with a left hook aimed at Maya's ribs. Maya stepped back, letting the punch whistle past her torso. She was studying Tank's rhythm, his timing, the way he telegraphed his attacks with slight shifts in his shoulders. He was skilled but predictable, relying on patterns that had worked against less technical opponents. Tank pressed forward, throwing a combination of punches that had more force than precision. Maya weaved between them like water flowing around rocks, her footwork keeping her just out of range. She hadn't thrown a single offensive technique yet, content to let Tank expend energy while she gathered information. "Stop running and fight," Tank barked, frustration already creeping into his voice. The crowd began to murmur among themselves. Some were impressed by Maya's defensive skills, while others shared Tank's frustration, wanting to see contact, wanting to see the outcome they had come to witness. She could hear fragments of conversation, bets being placed, predictions being made, most of them not in her favor. Captain Mitchell watched with professional interest. He had seen Maya's file, knew about her martial arts background, but files could be misleading. Watching her move, however, told him that her training was legitimate and extensive. Her defense wasn't luck, it was skill. Tank changed tactics, attempting to use his size to corner Maya against the edge of the mat. He threw a series of body shots, trying to limit her movement options. Maya absorbed one glancing blow to her shoulder, but continued to circle away, maintaining distance and control. "You can't run forever, Rodriguez." Tank's voice was louder now, playing to the crowd. "This isn't a dance class." Maya spoke for the first time since the fight began, her voice calm and clear. "I'm not running, Sergeant. I'm learning." The response seemed to infuriate Tank further. He lunged forward with a wild haymaker, putting his full weight behind the punch. It was exactly the kind of overcommitted attack Maya had been waiting for. She ducked under the swing and pivoted to Tank's side, finally seeing her opening. But Maya didn't take it. Not yet. She wanted Tank to fully commit, to show everyone watching exactly who he was when the mask of professionalism slipped away. She wanted to see what she had been dealing with her entire career. The assumption that aggression and intimidation were substitutes for skill and respect. Tank regrouped, breathing harder now. The easy victory he had expected was proving elusive, and Maya could see the calculation in his eyes changing. He was beginning to realize that this might not go as planned, but his pride wouldn't let him adjust his approach.
The murmur of the crowd had shifted from anticipation to genuine interest. What they had expected to be a brief demonstration of male superiority was evolving into something more complex, more nuanced. Maya Rodriguez wasn't just surviving. She was controlling the pace and distance of the fight with a level of skill that demanded respect. Tank wiped sweat from his forehead, his breathing becoming more labored. He had thrown dozens of punches, all with significant power behind them, but Maya's defensive movement had made him miss more often than not. The few shots that had landed were glancing blows, absorbed and moved away from before they could do meaningful damage. "Enough playing around," Tank muttered, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that Maya recognized immediately. She had heard that tone before, in the voices of men who couldn't accept that their assumptions about her were wrong, who became angry when reality didn't conform to their prejudices. Tank's next attack came with increased aggression and decreased control. He threw a vicious uppercut aimed at Maya's chin, followed immediately by a cross that would have ended the fight if it had connected. Maya's head movement was perfect, slipping both punches by mere inches, but she could feel the wind from Tank's fists as they passed her face. The crowd was beginning to take sides now. Some were clearly impressed by Maya's technical skill and composure under pressure. Others seemed frustrated by Tank's inability to land a decisive blow, their loyalty to the veteran creating a palpable tension in the room. Captain Mitchell stepped closer, his experienced eye recognizing that the dynamic was shifting. Tank's frustration was making him reckless, and Maya's patience was about to be rewarded. He had seen enough fights to know when the momentum was about to change. Maya felt the shift too. Tank's attacks were becoming more desperate, less technical. He was fighting angry now, and angry fighters made mistakes. Big mistakes. She began to counterattack for the first time, landing light jabs to Tank's face and body. Not hard enough to hurt him, but precise enough to score points and further bruise his ego. "You're embarrassing yourself, Rodriguez," Tank gasped between attacks, but his words lacked conviction now. The crowd could hear the strain in his voice, see the exhaustion in his movements. Maya's response was to land a perfect combination, jab, cross, hook, that snapped Tank's head back and drew a collective gasp from the watching soldiers. The shots weren't thrown with malicious intent, but they were thrown with authority, demonstrating that Maya could have been more aggressive throughout the fight if she had chosen to be. Tank staggered backward, touching his lip where Maya's last punch had split the skin. The sight of his own blood seemed to trigger something primal in the veteran. His face contorted with rage, and when he looked at Maya, she saw something that made her entire body tense with readiness. "You think you're better than me?" Tank's voice dropped to a growl. "You think because you can dance around and throw your little girl punches that you belong here?" Maya didn't respond verbally, but her stance shifted subtly. Her weight settled lower, her hands positioned differently. Anyone trained in martial arts would have recognized the change. She was transitioning from sport fighting to something more serious, more decisive. "I'll show you what real fighting looks like," Tank continued, and Maya saw him glance toward the crowd, seeking approval for what he was about to do. Time to end this kindergarten bullshit. Tank charged forward with everything he had, abandoning technique entirely in favor of brute force. His intention was clear. He wanted to grab Maya, use his size and strength to take her to the ground where his advantages would be overwhelming. It was a desperate tactic, the kind of move that worked against untrained opponents, but was dangerous against someone who knew how to respond. Maya saw the takedown attempt coming from the moment Tank shifted his weight. She had been preparing for this exact scenario, knowing that eventually, Tank's frustration would lead him to abandon the pretense of a technical sparring match. When he lunged forward, his arms outstretched to grab her, Maya was ready. She sidestepped Tank's charge with perfect timing, her movement so fluid it looked effortless. As Tank's momentum carried him past her, Maya's training took over. Years of grappling practice, countless hours of drilling defensive techniques, all condensed into a single moment of perfect execution. Maya caught Tank's extended arm as he stumbled past her, her grip precise and unbreakable. She pivoted her hips and dropped her center of gravity, using Tank's own momentum against him. The basic principle of jiu-jitsu, leverage over strength, technique over size, played out in real time as Maya controlled Tank's larger body with scientific precision. Tank felt himself being pulled off balance, his feet losing contact with the ground as Maya executed the throw. For a moment, he was completely airborne, his body subject to forces beyond his control. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the massive veteran, who had dominated the training facility for years through intimidation and aggression, found himself at the mercy of the small woman he had tried to humiliate.
But Maya wasn't finished. As Tank hit the mat hard, Maya maintained her grip on his arm, transitioning immediately into an armbar submission. Her legs wrapped around Tank's arm with the precision of a python, her hips positioned to create maximum leverage against his elbow joint. Tank's eyes went wide as he realized the precarious position he was in. Maya had complete control of his arm, and any sudden movement could result in serious injury. The tables had turned so quickly and so completely that the watching soldiers could barely process what they had witnessed.
The silence in the training facility was deafening. Tank Morrison, the veteran who had entered the mat with supreme confidence and the expectation of an easy victory, now found himself completely at Maya's mercy. His arm was locked in a textbook armbar, a submission hold that could snap his elbow joint with minimal effort if Maya chose to apply full pressure. Maya's position was perfect. Her legs controlled Tank's arm, while her hips created the fulcrum point that could generate devastating leverage against his elbow. She had applied just enough pressure to secure the submission without causing injury. Yet, Tank's eyes darted between Maya's face and his trapped arm, calculating his options and finding none that didn't end in significant pain or humiliation. "Tap out, Sergeant Morrison," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the silent room. There was no malice in her tone, no triumph or mockery. It was the voice of a professional offering her opponent a way to end the confrontation with his dignity relatively intact. Tank's face contorted with conflicting emotions. The physical reality of his situation was undeniable. He was beaten, controlled by someone he had dismissed as unworthy of sharing the same training space. But accepting defeat, especially so publicly and so completely, would shatter the reputation he had built over years of military service. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The crowd of watching soldiers remained frozen, witnessing something that challenged their understanding of strength, skill, and hierarchy. Many of them had been on the receiving end of Tank's aggression at some point, had accepted his dominance as a natural order based on size and experience. Seeing him controlled so completely by Maya Rodriguez forced them to reconsider assumptions they had never questioned. Captain Mitchell moved closer to the mat, ready to intervene if necessary. He recognized the technical perfection of Maya's submission hold and understood that Tank's arm was in serious danger if he chose to resist. The instructor had seen enough training accidents to know how quickly a controlled sparring session could turn into a medical emergency. "Sergeant Morrison," Captain Mitchell called out, his voice carrying the authority of command. "The exercise is over. Submit, or I'll stop it myself." But Tank's pride wouldn't allow such a simple resolution. In his mind, submitting to Maya would be admitting that everything he believed about military hierarchy, about gender roles in combat, about his own superiority was wrong.
The psychological stakes were too high for rational decision-making. Instead of tapping out, Tank attempted to power out of the submission, using his size and strength to try to force his way free. It was exactly the wrong response, the kind of move that turns a controlled technique into a weapon of destruction. Maya felt Tank's muscles tense as he prepared to resist, and her training kicked in automatically. "Don't," Maya warned, applying slightly more pressure to demonstrate the consequences of resistance. "You'll tear something." Tank either didn't hear the warning or chose to ignore it. He bridged his hips and attempted to roll, trying to escape the submission through brute force. The movement created exactly the kind of leverage Maya's position was designed to exploit. Tank's elbow joint was forced against its natural range of motion, creating stress that human anatomy was never meant to withstand. The sound that followed would be remembered by everyone in that room for years to come. It wasn't quite a crack, not quite a pop. It was something organic and wrong. The sound of cartilage and ligament giving way under forces they couldn't resist. Tank's attempted escape had turned Maya's controlled submission into an injury that would require months of rehabilitation. Tank's scream of pain cut through the training facility like a knife. Maya immediately released the hold, her face showing genuine concern and regret. She had tried to prevent this outcome, had offered Tank multiple opportunities to submit gracefully. His injury wasn't the result of her aggression. It was the consequence of his own ego overriding his survival instincts. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some soldiers rushed forward to help Tank, while others stood frozen in shock. Captain Mitchell was already on his radio, calling for medical assistance, while Maya knelt beside Tank, her training switching from combat to medical aid. "Don't move your arm," Maya instructed, her voice professional and calm despite the circumstances. "We need to stabilize it until the medics arrive." Tank's face was pale with pain and shock, but his eyes still burned with hatred as he looked at Maya. Even in his moment of vulnerability, even facing the consequences of his own poor decisions, he couldn't let go of his resentment toward the woman who had just demonstrated her superiority so decisively. You did that on purpose," Tank gasped through gritted teeth. Maya's expression remained composed, but those close enough could see the flash of hurt in her eyes. After everything she had done to avoid this outcome, after the warnings she had given and the opportunities she had provided for Tank to submit gracefully, he was still trying to paint her as the villain in a story of his own making. "I tried to stop you," Maya replied simply. "You chose to resist." The medical team arrived within minutes, professional and efficient in their assessment of Tank's injury. The preliminary diagnosis was what everyone feared: a dislocated elbow with possible ligament damage that would require surgery and extensive rehabilitation. Tank's training program was over, his military career possibly in jeopardy depending on how well the joint healed. As the medics prepared to transport Tank to the base hospital, Captain Mitchell addressed the crowd of soldiers who had witnessed the entire confrontation. His words would be remembered and repeated throughout the base, becoming part of the legend that would follow Maya Rodriguez for the rest of her military career.
"What you just witnessed," Captain Mitchell announced, his voice carrying the authority that comes with years of military leadership, was a perfect demonstration of why we don't underestimate our fellow soldiers based on preconceived notions. The crowd of soldiers listened in stunned silence as their instructor continued his impromptu lesson. Many of them were still processing what they had seen. Tank Morrison, the veteran who had intimidated recruits and dominated training exercises for years, laid low by a woman half his size whom he had dismissed as unworthy. Sergeant Rodriguez demonstrated superior technique, composure under pressure, and restraint in the face of aggression. Sergeant Morrison chose to let his ego override his tactical judgment, and he paid the price. Let this be a lesson to all of you. Respect is earned through skill and professionalism, not through intimidation and prejudice. Maya stood at the edge of the mat, her face a mask of professional composure that hid the emotional turmoil beneath. She had never wanted to seriously injure Tank, despite his attempts to humiliate her. The satisfaction she might have felt at proving her critics wrong was completely overshadowed by the reality of sending a fellow soldier to the hospital. As the medical team wheeled Tank away on a stretcher, his eyes found Maya one last time. The hatred she saw there was undiminished by his defeat or his injury. If anything, being bested so completely by someone he considered inferior had only intensified his resentment. Maya realized that while she had won this battle, the war for acceptance and respect was far from over. The crowd began to disperse, soldiers breaking into small groups to discuss what they had witnessed. The conversations Maya could overhear revealed the complexity of military culture. Some praised her skill and composure, while others expressed concern about the precedent her victory might set. Change, even positive change, was never easy in an institution built on tradition and hierarchy. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, one of the other few women in the advanced training program, approached Maya with a mixture of admiration and concern. Maria had been in the military for 8 years, long enough to understand the challenges Maya would face in the aftermath of this very public victory. "That was impressive," Maria said quietly. "But you know it's not over, right? Tank has friends, allies. They're going to make your life difficult." Maya nodded, having already considered the political ramifications of what had happened. Military culture valued loyalty above almost everything else, and Tank's supporters would view his defeat as an attack on their entire worldview. Maya had not only beaten one of their own, she had done it so thoroughly that it couldn't be dismissed as luck or circumstance. "I know, but I couldn't let him intimidate me into backing down. That would have set an even worse precedent." Captain Mitchell approached the two women, his expression thoughtful. He had been evaluating Maya since her arrival at the training facility, looking for weaknesses or signs that she couldn't handle the pressure. What he had seen today exceeded his expectations in ways he was still processing. "Rodriguez," the captain said, "I need to speak with you privately." Maya followed Captain Mitchell to his office, a Spartan space decorated only with military commendations and photographs from various deployments. She sat across from his desk, maintaining the professional posture that had been drilled into her since basic training. "That was textbook technique," Captain Mitchell began. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Maya provided a brief overview of her martial arts background, explaining how her father's death had motivated her to pursue both military service and personal defense training. She spoke about Master Chen, about the years of practice that had prepared her for moments like this, about the discipline required to remain calm under pressure. Captain Mitchell listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as Maya's story filled in gaps in his understanding. Her file had mentioned martial arts training, but files couldn't capture the level of skill and mental preparation she had just demonstrated. "Morrison's injury was unfortunate, but it wasn't your fault. You offered him multiple opportunities to submit, and I heard you warn him not to resist. His pride got in the way of his judgment." Maya felt a wave of relief at Captain Mitchell's assessment. She had been prepared for criticism, for accusations that she had used excessive force or had deliberately injured Tank. Having the instructor's support would be crucial in the days ahead. "However," Captain Mitchell continued, "you need to understand that this incident will follow you for the rest of your career. Some people will respect you for it, but others will resent you. Morrison wasn't well liked, but he was respected for his combat record. You've challenged the natural order as some of these men see it." Maya had anticipated this conversation and had already decided on her response. "Sir, with respect, if the natural order requires me to accept disrespect and intimidation, then maybe the natural order needs to be challenged." Captain Mitchell smiled for the first time since the incident. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say, Rodriguez.
You're going to face more challenges, more tests, more people trying to prove that today was a fluke. Are you prepared for that? Yes, sir. I've been preparing for it my entire life. The remainder of Maya's first week at the advanced training facility passed without major incident, but she could feel the tension in every interaction, every training exercise, every meal in the mess hall. Tank's absence was like a missing tooth, constantly noticed, constantly reminded of what had happened. Some soldiers went out of their way to acknowledge Maya's skill and professionalism. These were often the younger recruits, soldiers who hadn't yet been fully indoctrinated into the old ways of thinking about gender and hierarchy. They saw her victory over Tank as evidence that merit mattered more than prejudice.
But Tank Morrison's allies were not idle in the wake of their champion's defeat. Staff Sergeant Kevin Bulldog Harrison, Tank's closest friend and ideological soulmate, had watched the entire confrontation with growing anger and disbelief. A 20-year veteran with deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, Bulldog represented the old guard of military thinking, the belief that women were fundamentally unsuited for combat roles, and that political correctness was weakening the armed forces. In the days following Tank's injury, Bulldog worked quietly to build consensus among like-minded soldiers. He portrayed Maya's victory not as a demonstration of skill, but as a dangerous precedent that threatened the natural order of military hierarchy. In mess hall conversations and training room discussions, he planted seeds of resentment and doubt. "It's not about her being a woman," Bulldog would say to anyone who would listen, his words carefully chosen to avoid overt sexism while conveying his meaning perfectly. "It's about respect for experience, for rank, for the traditions that have kept this military strong. Tank's been serving his country since before Rodriguez was old enough to vote, and she puts him in the hospital for having the audacity to test her skills." The narrative Bulldog constructed was seductive in its simplicity. Tank became a victim of political correctness run amok, injured by someone who was trying to make a political statement rather than simply train alongside her fellow soldiers. Maya's skill and restraint were minimized, while Tank's aggression and poor decision-making were reframed as legitimate hazing that had gotten out of hand only because Maya chose to escalate rather than accept her place. Maya was aware of the Whisper campaign, but chose not to respond directly. She had learned early in her military career that defending yourself against rumors and innuendo often gave them more credibility than ignoring them. Instead, she focused on her training, consistently demonstrating the professionalism and skill that had earned her place in the program. Her performance in other aspects of the training was exemplary. Maya excelled in marksmanship, tactical planning, and physical conditioning. She helped struggling classmates without condescension, shared knowledge freely, and maintained the kind of positive attitude that good leaders cultivate in high-pressure situations. But excellence wasn't enough to silence her critics. If anything, Maya's competence seemed to fuel their resentment. Every achievement became evidence of preferential treatment. Every success proved that the standards had been lowered to accommodate diversity goals rather than maintain military effectiveness. The tension came to a head during a live-fire exercise 2 weeks after the incident with Tank. Maya was leading a squad through a simulated urban combat scenario, demonstrating tactical awareness and leadership skills that impressed the instructors. But as her team prepared to assault the final objective, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Private First Class Danny Weber, one of Bulldog Harrison's most vocal supporters, was positioned directly behind her in the stack, preparing to breach the building. His weapon was pointed in her direction, and while this wasn't unusual in close-quarters combat training, something about his positioning and body language triggered Maya's survival instincts. During a brief pause in the exercise, Maya caught Weber's eye and saw something there that confirmed her worst fears. The young soldier's hatred was almost palpable, his finger too close to the trigger of his weapon. Maya realized that the Whisper campaign against her had created an atmosphere where some soldiers might view her elimination as a service to the military.
Maya made a split-second decision that probably saved her life. Instead of leading the breach as planned, she stepped aside and assigned the point position to another soldier. Weber's barely concealed disappointment confirmed that she had been positioned to ensure that any accidental discharge would find its target. The remainder of the exercise proceeded without incident, but Maya knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. It was one thing to face discrimination and resentment. It was another entirely to face the possibility of fragging, the military term for soldiers killing their own officers or fellow soldiers. That evening, Maya sat in her quarters writing a letter she hoped she would never have to send. Addressed to her mother, it contained detailed accounts of the harassment and intimidation she had faced, culminating in her concerns about Weber's behavior during the live-fire exercise. If something happened to her, she wanted there to be a record of the events leading up to it. Maya sealed the letter and placed it in her personal effects, then made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. She would not be driven out by fear or intimidation. She would not allow Tank Morrison's defeat to be turned into her victory. Instead, she would double down on excellence, on professionalism, on proving that merit was more important than prejudice. The next morning, Maya requested a meeting with Captain Mitchell. She entered his office with the same professional bearing she had maintained since arriving at the training facility, but Mitchell could see the steel in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Sir, I need to report a potential safety issue," Maya began, then provided a detailed account of Weber's behavior during the live-fire exercise. She was careful to stick to observable facts, avoiding speculation about Weber's intentions, while making it clear that she considered him a threat to unit cohesion and safety. Captain Mitchell listened with growing concern. He had served long enough to recognize the signs of unit fragmentation, the way prejudice and resentment could poison the trust that was essential for military effectiveness. Maya's report confirmed his own observations about the toxic atmosphere that had developed in the wake of the incident with Tank. "What do you want me to do about it?" Captain Mitchell asked. Maya's response would surprise him and set the stage for everything that followed. "I want another fight, sir, a formal competition. Let anyone who thinks Tank's defeat was luck or politics step up and prove it."
Captain Mitchell stared at Maya for a long moment, processing her unexpected request. In his 15 years of military service, he had never had a soldier ask for a formal combat competition as a solution to harassment and discrimination. Most would have requested a transfer, filed complaints through proper channels, or simply tried to endure until the situation improved. "You want to fight more of them?" Captain Mitchell asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Sir, the problem isn't going away," Maya explained, her voice steady and professional. "Tank's supporters believe his defeat was a fluke, that I got lucky or caught him off guard. They're not going to accept my presence here until someone definitively proves that skill matters more than size or gender. A formal competition would settle this once and for all." Captain Mitchell leaned back in his chair, considering the implications of Maya's proposal. On one hand, it was an unorthodox solution that could easily backfire if Maya lost, or if the competition became a spectacle that undermined unit cohesion. On the other hand, the current situation was clearly untenable, with harassment escalating to the point where Maya's safety was potentially at risk. "And if you lose?" the captain asked. "Then I'll accept whatever consequences come with it," Maya replied without hesitation. "But sir, running away from this problem won't solve it. It will just move it to the next woman who tries to serve in this capacity. Someone has to take a stand." The conviction in Maya's voice reminded Captain Mitchell of why he had joined the military in the first place. The belief that service meant something more than just following orders, that sometimes leadership required taking risks to do what was right rather than what was safe. "I'll need to run this up the chain of command," Captain Mitchell said finally. "A formal competition like this would need approval from the base commander. But Rodriguez, you should know that if this goes badly, it could end your career." "With respect, sir, my career is already at risk. At least this way, I'm controlling the terms of engagement."
That afternoon, Captain Mitchell found himself in the office of Colonel Patricia Hendricks, the base commander whose reputation for fairness and tactical brilliance had earned her respect throughout the military. Colonel Hendricks listened to Mitchell's report with the kind of focused attention that had made her one of the youngest colonels in the Army. So, Rodriguez wants to formalize what's already happening informally. Interesting approach. What's your assessment of her chances? Honestly, ma'am, I think she could beat anyone on the space in a fair fight. Her technical skill is extraordinary, and she has the kind of mental composure that you can't teach. But this won't just be about fighting. It's about changing the culture of an institution that's resistant to change. Colonel Hendricks had faced her own battles with military culture during her rise through the ranks. She understood the unique challenges faced by women in combat roles and the importance of setting precedents that would benefit future generations of female soldiers. Approve it, she decided, but with conditions. This will be a sanctioned competition with proper medical supervision and clear rules of engagement. And Mitchell, make sure Rodriguez understands that she's not just fighting for herself. She's fighting for every woman who comes after her. Word of the approved competition spread through the base like wildfire. Within hours, soldiers from multiple units were discussing the upcoming event, placing bets, and choosing sides. The competition had evolved from a simple solution to Maya's harassment problem into a symbol of larger cultural tensions within the military. Bulldog Harrison was among the first to volunteer as Maya's opponent, his eagerness to avenge Tank's defeat overriding any concerns about the wisdom of fighting someone who had already proven her capabilities. But Maya had anticipated this and requested that she be allowed to face multiple opponents rather than just one, a demonstration that her skills were consistent rather than lucky. The competition was scheduled for the following Friday evening in the base's main gymnasium with proper medical staff and referee oversight. Maya would face 3 opponents in succession, each fight lasting a maximum of 10 minutes or until one fighter submitted or was rendered unable to continue. Bulldog Harrison would fight first, followed by Staff Sergeant Mike Tunder Rodriguez, a heavyweight boxer with an amateur record of 15-2. The third opponent would be determined by volunteers from the crowd, ensuring that Maya couldn't prepare specifically for her final challenger. As news of the competition spread beyond the base, Maya found herself at the center of attention she never sought. Military blogs picked up the story, framing it as everything from a groundbreaking moment for gender equality to a dangerous precedent that could undermine military discipline. The pressure was immense, but Maya had learned to channel pressure into focus, fear into preparation. Maya's training in the days leading up to the competition was methodical and intense. She studied video footage of her opponents, analyzed their fighting styles, and prepared strategies for different scenarios. But her preparation went beyond the physical. She also worked with the base chaplain on mental preparation, ensuring that she could maintain her composure regardless of the outcome. Master Chen, her former martial arts instructor, made a special trip to the base to help Maya prepare. Now in his 70s, but still moving with the fluid precision that had made him legendary, Chen spent hours working with Maya on technique refinement and mental preparation. Fighting is easy, Chen told Maya during one of their sessions. Fighting with the weight of expectation, with the knowledge that you represent more than yourself, that is the real challenge. Remember, you are not fighting these men. You are fighting fear. Their fear of change, their fear of being wrong, and their fear of losing control.
The gymnasium on the evening of the competition was packed beyond capacity. Soldiers from across the base had gathered to witness what many were calling the most significant fight in military history since the integration of combat units. The atmosphere was electric with tension, anticipation, and conflicting loyalties that split the crowd into visible factions. Maya entered the gymnasium to a mixture of cheers and hostile silence. She wore standard military PT gear, shorts, t-shirt, and regulation sneakers, but her presence commanded attention in a way that had nothing to do with her appearance and everything to do with the magnitude of what she was attempting.
Colonel Hendricks served as the evening's master of ceremonies, her voice carrying clearly over the crowd noise as she explained the rules and emphasized the importance of maintaining military discipline regardless of personal feelings about the outcome. Tonight, we settle questions about capability, about merit, and about the kind of military we want to be, Colonel Hendricks announced. Win or lose, Sergeant Rodriguez has already demonstrated the courage to face her critics directly rather than backing down from controversy. That alone deserves our respect. Maya's first opponent, Bulldog Harrison, entered the makeshift ring to enthusiastic cheers from Tank Morrison supporters. At 42, Bulldog was past his physical prime, but still formidable with the kind of seasoned aggression that came from years of combat experience and street fighting that predated his military service. Bulldog had spent the week studying footage of Maya's fight with Tank, looking for weaknesses and patterns he could exploit. He had also been receiving advice from Tank himself, who watched from the sidelines in a cast, his desire for revenge temporarily overcoming his injuries. The referee, Master Sergeant David Park, was a respected veteran whose neutrality was accepted by both factions. He called the fighters to the center of the mat and reminded them that this was a military exercise, not a street fight, and that excessive aggression would result in immediate disqualification. "Fighters ready?" Master Sergeant Park asked. Maya nodded, settling into the fighting stance that had become her signature, balanced, alert, ready to move in any direction. Her breathing was controlled, her expression calm, despite the enormous pressure she was facing. Bulldog bounced on his toes, his hands up in a classic boxing stance. Unlike Tank, who had fought emotionally, Bulldog was approaching this tactically. He'd studied Maya's defensive patterns and planned to use lateral movement and combination punching to overwhelm her technical advantages. Fight! Bulldog immediately, but methodically, using footwork to cut off Maya's escape routes while throwing measured jabs to test her reactions. He was clearly more tactical than Tank had been, showing patience and ring intelligence that made him a more dangerous opponent despite being older and less athletic. Maya responded with her characteristic defensive movement, but the crowd could see that Bulldog was presenting different challenges than Tank had been. His punches were more accurate, his positioning better, his approach more sustainable. This would not be a quick victory built on opponent mistakes. For the first 3 minutes of the fight, Bulldog controlled the pace and distance, landing several light shots while avoiding Maya's counterattacks. The crowd began to murmur with anticipation. Perhaps Tank's defeat had been a fluke after all. Perhaps Bulldog would restore the natural order that Maya's previous victory had challenged. But Maya was learning, adapting, finding the patterns in Bulldog's movement that every fighter eventually reveals. She began to time his attacks more precisely, slipping punches by smaller margins and creating opportunities for her own offense. Her counterattacks, when they came, were sharp and accurate, landing with authority that drew surprised reactions from the crowd. The turning point came in the 4th minute, when Bulldog, frustrated by Maya's defensive skills, attempted to corner her against the edge of the mat. Maya used his aggressive forward movement against him, executing a perfect hip toss that sent Bulldog crashing to the ground with Maya controlling his back. The crowd erupted as Maya secured a rear naked choke, wrapping her arms around Bulldog's neck with textbook precision. Bulldog struggled violently, using his strength and experience to try to escape, but Maya's position was perfect, her technique flawless. "Tap out," Maya whispered in Bulldog's ear, applying just enough pressure to demonstrate the inevitability of his situation. Bulldog's pride warred with his survival instincts for nearly 30 seconds before the lack of oxygen made the decision for him. His hand slapped against Maya's arm in submission, and Master Sergeant Park immediately stopped the fight. Maya released the choke instantly, helping Bulldog to his feet with genuine concern for his well-being. Despite everything he had said about her, despite the harassment campaign he had orchestrated, Maya showed him the same respect she would want for herself. The gymnasium was split between celebration and stunned silence. Maya's supporters were ecstatic, while Bulldog's faction struggled to process their champion's defeat. One victory could be dismissed as luck, but two demonstrated a pattern that was harder to ignore.
"Your second opponent is ready," Master Sergeant Park announced, giving Maya only a few minutes to recover before facing Staff Sergeant Mike Thunder Rodriguez. Thunder was a different kind of challenge, younger than Bulldog at 28, with the kind of raw power that had made him the base heavyweight boxing champion. Where Bulldog had relied on experience and tactics, Thunder planned to use speed and strength to overwhelm Maya before her technical skills could become a factor. Maya assessed her new opponent as he warmed up, noting his reach advantage and the explosive power in his shoulders and legs. Thunder was a finisher. He liked to end fights quickly and dramatically, which meant Maya would need to survive his initial assault before implementing her own game plan.
Thunder approached the center of the mat with the confidence of a man who had never lost a fight on the base. His amateur boxing record spoke to legitimate skill, but more importantly, his knockout power had ended most of his fights in the first round. He planned to use that power to end Maya's winning streak before it could become a legend. "This one's for Tank and Bulldog," Thunder announced, loud enough for the crowd to hear, his words drawing enthusiastic cheers from soldiers who still believed that size and strength were more important than technique and preparation. Maya acknowledged Thunder's declaration with a slight nod, but didn't respond verbally. She had learned that engaging in trash talk only provided emotional fuel for opponents who were already motivated by factors beyond simple competition. Her response would come through action, not words. Master Sergeant Park called the fighters together for final instructions, reminding them that this was still a military exercise despite the charged atmosphere. He could feel the tension in the room, see the way the crowd had split into clearly defined factions based on their beliefs about gender roles, military tradition, and the meaning of Maya's victories. "Keep it clean, keep it professional," Park instructed. "Touch gloves and fight." Thunder's strategy was immediately apparent. He came forward aggressively from the opening bell, throwing power punches designed to end the fight quickly. His first combination, a straight right followed by a left hook, would have knocked out most opponents if it had connected cleanly. Maya's head movement saved her, slipping both punches by inches, while moving laterally to avoid being trapped against the edge of the mat. But Thunder's aggression was relentless, and Maya found herself defending more than she had against either Tank or Bulldog. Thunder's youth and conditioning showed as he maintained his aggressive pace through the first 2 minutes of the fight. Unlike his predecessors, he wasn't fighting angry or emotional. He was executing a clear game plan with the kind of tactical awareness that made him genuinely dangerous. Maya absorbed several glancing blows while looking for openings in Thunder's offense. His boxing technique was fundamentally sound, his punches thrown with proper form and defensive responsibility. This wasn't the wild swinging she had faced from Tank or the predictable patterns Bulldog had eventually revealed. The crowd was on their feet, sensing that this fight was different from the previous two. Thunder supporters were encouraged by his early success, while Maya's backers watched with growing concern as their champion struggled to establish her usual defensive rhythm. But Maya's training with Master Chen had prepared her for exactly this scenario, facing an opponent whose skills were legitimate and whose approach was tactically sound. The key wasn't to abandon her game plan, but to trust it, to remain patient while looking for the opening that every aggressive fighter eventually provides. That opening came in the 3rd minute when Thunder, encouraged by his early success, began to overcommit to his power shots. A particularly aggressive right cross left him slightly off balance, and Maya saw her chance. She stepped inside Thunder's reach and clinched, using her grappling skills to neutralize his boxing advantages. Thunder immediately tried to separate, uncomfortable in the close quarters grappling range where his boxing skills were less effective. But Maya maintained the clinch, working for position while Thunder expended energy trying to break free. When Thunder finally created separation, he was breathing harder and slightly off balance. Maya capitalized immediately, landing a clean combination that snapped Thunder's head back and drew a collective gasp from the crowd. For the first time in the fight, Thunder looked hurt. Maya pressed her advantage, but remained disciplined, not allowing Thunder's apparent vulnerability to make her reckless. She had learned from watching countless fighters lose by overcommitting when they sensed victory, and she wasn't going to make that mistake. Thunder's conditioning began to show as the fight entered its 4th minute. His punches lacked the snap they had shown early, and his footwork became less crisp.
Maya's defensive strategy was paying dividends. By making Thunder miss and forcing him to work harder for his offense, she had gradually shifted the momentum of the fight. The end came suddenly and decisively. Thunder, frustrated by his inability to land the knockout blow he had counted on, lunged forward with a desperate haymaker that left him completely exposed. Maya's counter was perfectly timed, a straight right hand that caught Thunder flush on the chin as his own momentum carried him forward. Thunder's legs buckled immediately, his eyes showing the glazed look that indicated a serious concussion. Maya didn't follow up with additional strikes, instead stepping back and allowing Master Sergeant Park to assess Thunder's condition. The fight was over. The medical staff rushed onto the mat to evaluate Thunder, who was conscious but clearly disoriented. Maya waited respectfully while the medics did their work, showing the same concern for Thunder's well-being that she had demonstrated with her previous opponents. Colonel Hendricks stepped forward to address the crowd, her voice carrying clearly over the stunned murmur of conversation. Sergeant Rodriguez has now defeated 3 skilled opponents using superior technique and tactical awareness. I think the question of her capability has been definitively answered. But Maya held up her hand, indicating that she had something to say. The gymnasium fell silent as she stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed space. With respect, ma'am, I volunteered to face 3 opponents tonight, and I intend to honor that commitment. Is there anyone else who questions whether I belong here? The challenge hung in the air like electricity. Maya had already proven her point twice over, but she was offering one final opportunity for anyone who still doubted her skills to step forward and test them personally.
The silence in the gymnasium stretched for what felt like an eternity. Maya's challenge had caught everyone off guard. She had already exceeded expectations by defeating 3 skilled opponents, but her offer to face a 4th demonstrated a level of confidence and determination that left even her supporters speechless. Colonel Hendricks studied Maya's face, searching for signs of fatigue or overconfidence that might indicate poor judgment. What she saw instead was the calm resolve of a professional soldier who understood exactly what she was doing and why it was necessary. Sergeant Rodriguez, Colonel Hendricks said carefully, "You've already proven your point. No one could question your capability after tonight's performance." "Ma'am, with respect, that's not entirely true," Maya replied, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed gymnasium. "I can see it in some faces, the belief that I've just been lucky, that eventually I'll face someone who exposes my limitations. I'd rather settle this completely tonight than deal with months of whispered doubts and what-ifs." The crowd stirred restlessly as Maya's words hit home. She was right. Despite her impressive victories, there were still those who attributed her success to favorable circumstances rather than genuine skill. Her offer to continue fighting was a direct challenge to that mindset. Master Sergeant Park stepped forward, his expression concerned. "Rodriguez, you've been fighting for over 30 minutes. Your judgment might be compromised by fatigue." Her response was to demonstrate a brief series of martial arts forms, her movements flowing with the same precision and control she had shown at the beginning of the evening. "I'm fine, Master Sergeant. Better than fine, actually." From the crowd, a voice called out with the kind of respectful challenge that indicated genuine curiosity rather than hostility. "I'll face her." All eyes turned toward the speaker, Staff Sergeant Jennifer Phoenix Martinez, a military police officer whose reputation for toughness was legendary throughout the base. Phoenix was one of the few women who had earned universal respect from male soldiers, primarily because she had never asked for special consideration and had consistently outperformed her peers in every measurable category. Phoenix's offer to fight Maya surprised everyone, including Maya herself. The crowd's reaction was immediate and complex. This wasn't the scenario anyone had anticipated. Phoenix represented something different from the previous opponents, a challenger whose motivations weren't rooted in gender-based resentment, but in professional curiosity. "Why?" Maya asked, genuinely puzzled by Phoenix's challenge. Phoenix stepped forward, her expression serious but not hostile. She said, "Because I want to know where I stand. You've beaten 3 men tonight, all skilled fighters. I need to know if you're really as good as you appear to be, or if there's something about male psychology that's working in your favor."
The honesty of Phoenix's response earned nods of approval from throughout the crowd. This wasn't about proving that women didn't belong in combat roles, it was about establishing a hierarchy based on actual capability rather than assumptions. Colonel Hendricks considered the request carefully. Phoenix's challenge was fundamentally different from the others Maya had faced. This would be a test of pure skill without the emotional baggage and psychological factors that had influenced Maya's previous fights. Very well, Colonel Hendricks decided, but this will be the final fight of the evening, regardless of outcome. Maya and Phoenix approached each other at the center of the mat with mutual respect evident in their postures and expressions. Both women understood that they were participating in something historically significant, the first time two female soldiers had faced each other in formal combat competition at this level. "Good luck," Phoenix said, extending her hand. "You too," Maya replied, accepting the handshake with genuine warmth. Master Sergeant Park called the fighters to position, but the atmosphere was completely different from the previous fights. The crowd was quieter, more focused, watching with the kind of professional interest that indicated they understood they were witnessing something special. The fight that followed was unlike anything the crowd had seen that evening. Where Maya's previous opponents had relied primarily on size, strength, or aggression, Phoenix brought technical skill that matched Maya's own. Both women moved with fluid precision, their techniques clean and purposeful. For the first time all evening, Maya faced an opponent who could match her defensive capabilities while presenting offensive threats that required serious respect. Phoenix's striking was crisp and accurate, her footwork excellent, her tactical awareness sharp. The fight developed into a chess match, with both women probing for openings while defending against their opponent's attacks. Neither fighter was able to establish clear dominance, creating a back-and-forth battle that showcased the highest level of technical skill the crowd had ever witnessed. In the 5th minute, Maya attempted a takedown that Phoenix defended beautifully, countering with a knee strike that caught Maya in the ribs. The shot was clean and hard, drawing a grunt of pain from Maya and concerned murmurs from her supporters. But Maya's conditioning and pain tolerance served her well. She absorbed the shot and continued fighting, adjusting her tactics to account for Phoenix's defensive skills. The two women clinched briefly, each trying to gain position for a decisive technique. The end came not through dominance, but through a moment of perfect timing. Phoenix attempted a spinning back fist that would have ended the fight if it had connected, but Maya's defensive instincts allowed her to duck under the technique and counter with a single-leg takedown that put Phoenix on the ground. Maya secured side control and worked patiently for a submission, eventually catching Phoenix in an arm triangle choke that forced the tap after a valiant struggle. As Maya helped Phoenix to her feet, both women were smiling despite their exhaustion. They had pushed each other to their limits and found that their skills were more evenly matched than anyone had anticipated. "Hell of a fight," Phoenix said, breathing hard but grinning. "You too," Maya replied. "That knee shot is going to hurt for a week." The crowd erupted in applause that had nothing to do with faction or ideology and everything to do with appreciation for the display of skill, heart, and professionalism they had just witnessed.
Colonel Hendricks stepped forward to address the crowd one final time, her voice carrying the authority of command and the weight of historical significance. Tonight, Sergeant Rodriguez has demonstrated that excellence knows no gender, that skill transcends prejudice, and that the United States military is strongest when it embraces merit over tradition. The applause that followed was sustained and genuine, coming from soldiers who had entered the gymnasium with doubts and were leaving with a fundamentally altered understanding of capability and potential. Maya had not just won 4 fights, she had won something far more valuable: respect, based on demonstrated competence rather than tolerance based on political correctness. As the crowd began to disperse, Maya found herself surrounded by soldiers who wanted to congratulate her, ask questions about her training, or simply acknowledge what they had witnessed. The conversations revealed how profoundly the evening had affected military personnel who had never seriously considered that their assumptions about gender and combat might be wrong. Staff Sergeant Williams, a 20-year veteran who had been vocally skeptical of women in combat roles, approached Maya with obvious discomfort but genuine respect. "Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. I've been wrong about a lot of things and tonight proved it. If you're ever willing to teach some of those techniques, I'd like to learn."
Similar conversations played out throughout the gymnasium as Maya's former critics grappled with the reality that their worldview had been fundamentally challenged. Not everyone would change their minds immediately. Deeply held beliefs don't disappear overnight, but seeds of doubt had been planted in the certainty that had previously defined their thinking. Tank Morrison, still wearing his cast, but walking under his own power, approached Maya with an expression that was difficult to read. The crowd quieted as the two soldiers faced each other, everyone wondering how Tank would handle this encounter with the woman who had ended his reputation as the base's dominant fighter. "That was impressive," Tank said, finally, the words clearly difficult for him to speak. "I still don't like you, Rodriguez, and I still think this whole thing has been blown out of proportion, but I can't deny what I saw tonight. You earned this." It wasn't a full apology or a complete change of heart, but coming from Tank Morrison, it represented a significant shift. Maya accepted his grudging acknowledgement with grace, understanding that asking for more would be unrealistic and counterproductive. "Thank you, Sergeant Morrison. I hope your arm heals completely." Tank nodded stiffly and walked away, but not before Maya caught something in his expression that suggested their relationship, while never friendly, might at least become professional. Phoenix Martinez proved to be Maya's most valuable new ally, immediately volunteering to help Maya deal with the increased attention and responsibility that would follow her victories. "You're going to be a symbol now, whether you want to be or not," Phoenix warned. "Every woman who comes after you will be measured against what you accomplished tonight. That's a hell of a responsibility." Maya understood the truth of Phoenix's observation. Her victories had elevated her from individual soldier to representative of all women in military service. Every mistake she made would be magnified, every success scrutinized for evidence that it was exceptional rather than replicable. Over the following weeks, Maya's life changed in ways both positive and challenging. She received interview requests from military publications, invitations to speak at training facilities on other bases, and unofficial consultations from commanders dealing with integration issues in their own units. The advanced training program continued, but Maya's presence in it had fundamentally altered the dynamic. Her classmates now sought her input on tactical problems, recognizing that her unique perspective and demonstrated skills made her a valuable asset to any team. The harassment and isolation that had defined her early weeks at the facility were replaced by genuine collegiality and professional respect. Maya's performance in the remaining months of the program was exemplary in every measurable category. She graduated first in her class, earning commendations for leadership, tactical awareness, and the kind of positive influence on unit cohesion that the military valued above almost everything else. But perhaps the most significant change was in the soldiers who had witnessed her victories that night in the gymnasium. Many of them went on to serve as advocates for gender integration in their subsequent assignments, carrying the memory of Maya's performance as evidence that capability mattered more than demographics. The young women who entered military service in the years following Maya's breakthrough faced different challenges than she had. They still encountered skepticism and had to prove themselves repeatedly, but they did so in an environment where excellence was increasingly recognized regardless of who demonstrated it. Maya Rodriguez never set out to be a pioneer or a symbol. She simply wanted to serve her country with the same honor that had motivated her father. But sometimes history chooses its heroes rather than the other way around, and Maya's willingness to stand up for herself and others had changed the trajectory of military culture in ways that would benefit generations of soldiers who came after her. The veteran who had tried to humiliate her in training had learned that underestimating someone based on assumptions was a dangerous mistake. Maya hadn't just snapped his arm, she had shattered the illusion that strength was defined by gender rather than character, that belonging was determined by tradition rather than merit. And in doing so, she had made the military stronger, more capable, and more worthy of the diverse nation it served.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.